This podcast is intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Out of the Ashes presents Missing Dad.
I might have ended up on the wrong side of the tracks if Pops wouldn't have pulled me back and said, yo.
Each episode is a thought-provoking interview with people across all walks of life to see how they were affected by missing key pieces in their relationship with their dad.
Told him as a youngster, he'll be the greatest man alive.
And now your hosts, Coley Harris and Omar Melton.
Welcome to another episode of Missing Dad. I'll be your co-host, Coley Harris.
And I'm Omar Melton.
And we are fortunate to have with us today a very, very good brother that has been in the trenches in Wilmington. How long you been working in the field, working with young people, man?
Since 1998.
1998. So we talking about 22 years working with all these hard.
And actually, I started. No, that's the year I graduated college, like 97, 96.
97.
I was working part-time with Project Stay Free.
Stay Free?
Yeah, not around anymore, but.
Yeah, y'all was over there thumping them kids. But nah, this is a good brother, Dr. Moriel McDuffy, good friend of mine, colleague, and just all around good person. And he's been, as he mentioned, he's been working in the field with kids and young people, all of these for so many years. And we're just glad to have you come on the show this evening and share some of your, life experiences with us. You and I, we have a lot of deep conversations talking about just being fathers and relationships with our own fathers, that intergenerational parenting and things of that nature. And I just would love for you to share some of your insight and some of your experiences with us. And that's my son. You might
Yeah. I'm aware. I'm aware of your son. Yeah,
I'm just kidding. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Dr. McDuffy.
So, I said before, I started in this field right before I graduated college. I was working part-time for Project Stay Free. I've done everything from family therapy with a lot of juveniles in the justice system to youth and family interventions with juveniles in the justice system. It seemed like I've always mostly worked primarily with adolescent males.
Okay.
However, that's not the only population I work with, but a vast majority of my experience is from working with adolescent males. Worked at the Boys and Girls Club, ran a reentry program for the Boys and Girls Club as well as for 3 years. And then the other 3 years I was like the recreation director. Okay. For them. So, yeah, I've done juvenile sex offender treatment. I'm doing some adult sex offender treatment.
Okay.
So, yeah, I got a lot of experience in terms of dealing with young men, dealing with youth. As far as dads are concerned, definitely worked with a lot of young men who dad wasn't there.
Yeah.
Or maybe he was there, but he wasn't, and physically, but he wasn't active.
Well, what about you? Where did you grow up at?
So I grew up in Newcastle, Delaware, right in Hamilton Park, down the street from Southbridge, in between Southbridge and Rosegate. I grew up there. I've been in Delaware since like 82, something like that. Okay. I was a little kid, so Yep.
What was the environment like? What was the neighborhood like growing up in Hamilton Park in the 80s?
Hamilton Park in the 80s and early 90s was like it's just the working class black neighborhood. You know what I mean? A little bit of everything there. You get some of the spill out as far as crime. You get you have some you have some people that are well off, some people that ain't so well off. It's like a mix. It's like a mix, and it's right on the cusp of the city. So you get a little bit of that coming in there too. So you get a little bit of everything. I think it was a positive. Overall, it was a positive experience for me.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. It was one of those things. We're growing up. I was one of the few dudes though my age that like graduated from regular high school.
Right.
There was a lot of dudes that ended up going to night school or didn't graduate or had to go back and get a GED. I always played sports, so that kind of kept me out of trouble. You know.
Okay.
I got to high school, I was like playing football, wrestling, running track. So that kind of kept me. Like when I was in college, I had boys whose houses was getting raided. For drugs.
Right.
So, one of the things that I always did to stay away from that is just I played sports. I stayed busy doing something else.
Right.
And then I never wanted to. One thing I never wanted to do was my parents in general, and especially my dad, him being like that person that set those real hard boundaries for me.
Right.
And my mom allowed him to set those hard boundaries. You
right.
know, and never interfering with that. Never wanted to let him down by doing something. Like in the street and getting in trouble.
Okay.
So,
And you were how many siblings were there?
so I'm one of 6.
Okay.
Got four sisters and a younger brother.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah, and we all kind of went through like Colonial School District, Win Penn. All graduated high school, all went to college, all got like advanced degrees or whatever.
Nice. Nice.
What's your dad's relationship with your grandfather? Like, what was that like?
It's interesting too because my dad and granddad, I think I would describe it as agree to disagree to some degree. They had some different views.
Right.
I think it was a respectful relationship, but they had some different views. It never played out disrespectfully, as far as I know, especially in front of us. But they definitely had some different views. My granddad was real old school.
Okay.
Very old school. He was born at almost like at the turn of the century, almost like at the beginning of the 19th century. So, his thing was like basically just work hard, stay in line, have a certain car for a certain house and stuff. And my dad was born in the 40s, and his thing, he was in the civil rights era, all into, the marching and rights for black people. And I don't know, it clashed a little bit. Their views clashed a little bit. Some of their priorities clashed a little bit. So yeah. But overall, I would say, like I said, it was a respectful relationship.
Okay.
When your father was growing up, was your granddad always in the household?
Except for when he was away at war.
When he was away at war, how long was he away?
So my granddad was in World War II. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I just know that he went away, came back, and this was before PTSD was known. People know what it was. For those that don't know what it is, post-traumatic stress disorder, where you had those trauma echoes. So you couldn't wake them up. They might try to kill you, literally. Like, and that's the stories that I got was that, when he came back, you better wake him up from a distance. You better not try to wake him up, then, because he was over, in Europe fighting the war.
Wow. And your grandfather, where's your family? Like your grandfather, and that's how where they come from? They're from this area or?
Well, it's funny because we got roots in this area from family. But originally from Florida. Even my dad, he was born in Bradenton, Florida. I got people down in Palmetto. But I did have like an uncle. My uncle Go lived up here. So my granddad, part of his younger life, lived in Wilmington.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and then they lived in Philadelphia, and then they moved over to South Jersey.
Okay. Nice. So what was your relationship like with the rest of your siblings? You know what I mean? How like. So 2 parts. What was your relationship like with your siblings? And I know you mentioned that all of your siblings, all of you guys have advanced degrees, which is a remarkable feat. So I know your parents, both of your parents had to, really be on it. But so what was your relationship with your siblings, and how did you notice like your parents and your father in particular, did he parent each one of you differently?
Yeah, so I would say, like, my siblings, we were all tight, and we're still tight to this day. Typical sibling stuff, sibling rivalries that happen, they happen in the house, but one thing that we were always taught is when you leave the house, that's where it stays. So we might fight in the house, when we come outside, we take up for each other.
Right.
Yeah, I would say we were all tight. I mean, whenever you got 6 siblings and you have this different order, you have some jealousies, you have some fighting. One thing my parents were good at doing was differentiating. So they would... my mom and dad would say, like, if they gave my older sister something that they didn't give me and I knew about it, then they would say, listen, she's older. When you get older, you get it too. But right now, she's older, so this is what she gets, and this is what you get. They were also good at, I can remember when they gave me stuff in secret, like, listen, you don't tell nobody else, here you go, this for you. Don't say nothing else. Yeah. So they knew that, it was easy for somebody to get a complex, to get jealous, so they knew how to manage it.
Yeah.
The one thing I would say is, for me personally, because my mentality when I was younger was very rambunctious, to say the least, right? I had a temper. But my mom always allowed my dad, for the most part, to manage it. Look, go ahead, talk to your dad. You know what I mean? She knew that. And me being a boy, that was my gender role model, so I looked at my dad and, like, what he said went. My mom said I listened, but I didn't always listen as much. It was like my dad said it, I was like standing at attention. You know what I mean? Right. And that was the relationship that we had, and those were the hard boundaries that he set. And my mom set the same hard boundaries because she was tough, but it was still, for me as a young boy, I was looking at my dad most of the time.
And you would say like those boundaries, your dad, because you mentioned it a few times, setting those firm boundaries that worked well for you and guiding you throughout life.
He did, and it wasn't like overly hard. Like he wasn't punching me in the chest and saying man up, but he set boundaries of what was appropriate, what was inappropriate, and at times when you needed that little positive reinforcement, he gave you that too if you did something well, because it's all in balance. And I think sometimes, people can get out of balance when dealing with kids. You got to remember that if you're constantly coming down on for something negative, then also identify something positive too.
Right.
They're doing well.
So you came up and you said in like the Southbridge, Newcastle area in the 80s, right?
Yeah.
So what and your dad was always in the household with you, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm sure, he saw what was going on, like with the change of the times and with the crack epidemic and all of that going on. And just like the different things that come with that, the money, the violence and things that you see outside of the household. What was his conversations like with you to kind of keep you on track and away from that?
Yeah, that's a good question. My dad was always like, he always kept a firm grip on us. So we had like a lot of structure, where we could go when we had to be home. If I was out all the time, because this was a time when you went outside as a kid, you went outside. Like you wasn't nowadays. Kids don't go out and play like that. Like we might be outside all day. If I ain't going to school, I might be outside from like 8 to like 6. But I had to check-in times. You got to come check in at certain times. My neighborhood was small, so the good thing is like you knew everybody. If somebody was dealing drugs, you knew who was dealing drugs. You knew who, like the jokers who you knew, and so it wasn't like I was really worrying about. It wasn't. I don't think we were really worrying about a whole bunch of like strife or beef, because you knew everybody.
Right.
You know what I mean? It wasn't like that. Now, if somebody came from the outside, there was also certain people who, when they come from the outside, they wasn't gonna let that happen. So
Yeah.
it really, as far as danger level, we really didn't have, besides some drug dealing like you used to see. They had caps. I don't know if you know about caps. But them caps would be all, I know you do. They be all over the street. So that's when you knew somebody's out there doing something, right? Because it was caps everywhere. So, I mean, we knew that it was there, but it wasn't like it was right in your face, and it wasn't like the people who was doing it, you didn't know who they were, and you didn't, and they weren't a threat to you per se. You know what I mean?
Caps.
Yeah, that's a long
It's
time
funny
ago.
you said that. Yeah, them drugs. I mean, they like you said, and more you mentioned like in the 80s, it hit like all over the place. What are some of the ramifications of like the drug epidemic that you've seen, like visually, some changes like in your neighborhood? Because I can remember growing up, and I literally, you knew people like got high and indulged in different things, but you just started seeing people's quality of life like going downhill, and you could see it. You be like, damn, that's like they really sliding over there. I remember one time we was at I forget it, I don't even remember who it was, but I remember it was around Christmas time, and I seen a guy. He literally went back and forth in the house, like taking the Christmas presents out and just stuff out the house and just selling it to dudes in the neighborhood. And I can only imagine what them kids felt like when they woke up the next morning. Cause I mean, we was out there all night, and I was like, this is messed up.
Yeah.
This is messed up. So what was some of the like the changes you seen in the neighborhood around that?
Yeah, I mean, so the things
If any.
yeah, well, I mean, growing up, like I said, it was my area. There was always somebody that was, selling drugs, and they'd be connected with somebody, maybe Southbridge or somebody somewhere else, in Newcastle or whatever. In terms of that, I mean, I've seen a few people where, their parents were like on something. I couldn't tell you, you know what I mean? I'm just assuming. Of course, everybody just says crackhead or they're on crack or whatever, but whatever they were on,
Right.
it was apparent. And the thing that I noticed is just that focus is different. You know what I mean? They're not worried about their kids as much. It might not be food in the house. They're not really worried about their security and well-being, because that focus is on that drug. It's the addiction aspect of it. So I just know that, I can only look at it from the outside and only imagine how the kids on the inside was feeling, who are my age or maybe a little younger,
Right.
and just be like, damn, this is a messed up situation.
Yeah.
And so I had empathy for him, but I really, in terms of what was going on in my house, I couldn't really, tell anybody what it was like, but you can see that it's definitely not a good situation. You know what I mean? And that, and so in certain situations, I've seen people who went out and decided they had to go and hustle because literally they were teenagers, but their parent wasn't providing for them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And the parent ain't providing for you because they have a drug habit. So now they had to go out and hit the streets.
You mentioned that and you were a little rambunctious. You know what I mean? I know that came with its own set of, you know what I mean, issues with that. But you made it to college.
Yeah.
You made it to college. And so how was the transition going from, you know what I mean, kind of the rambunctious to the teenager to making it to college? How was that transition for you?
I mean, it's interesting. Part of the rambunctiousness for me is I had a quick temper, and you know, moving into the neighborhood, we were different. We moved over from Jersey. I was young though. Everybody was young. My sister being the oldest, I think she was like 14. I don't remember exactly how old I was. When my sister started off, she was either in 8th or 9th grade.
Right.
She's 5 years older than me. I think I was about 8 or 9. So, you know, when dealing with people that just constantly make fun. Oh, you know, look at your sneaks. Look at this. Look at that. So I didn't have the social skills to navigate that at the time. So it was a learning experience of, you know, not only being out and standing up for yourself, but probably in an inappropriate way, right?
Right.
But then also learning how to handle people without, you know, throwing fisticuffs or fighting or whatever, without cussing people out and doing things of that nature. And that's something that you just learn over time. The interesting thing is in school is probably where it definitely played a lot in school, because I ended up, you know, getting suspended. And one year, I remember being in 4th grade, I was on homebound. I got in so many fights, I was on homebound. Yeah. And for those who don't know what homebound is where you go to school after everybody else going home. Right. So me and my mom be pulling up to drop me off while everybody else get on the bus to go home.
Right.
So and then I would go work with a teacher individually, do my work and all that. Right. I remember being sent into. Back then they didn't have alternative programs, but they had what they call an IP program. The kids
IP.
Yeah, they call it important person to be funny, right? You're an important person, but it meant individual program. So you be in there. It'd be a bunch of other people with behavior issues. The curriculum was not challenging at all, really. Right. And then you're in there. I'm in there for behavior, really not necessarily not academics per se, but you know you fall behind because you're not really learning the same thing that learn the other classes. Right. And to be honest with you, moving forward, once I worked my way out and I learned a little awareness, matured, learned how not to respond to everything. I basically worked my way out. So by I think I went into IP probably 4th or 5th grade because I did homebound and I went in. They sent me from Colwick to McCullough, and I was in those classes probably up. And then I started working my way out in middle school around 7th grade, 8th grade, where I was like in between both. I would have a couple of those classes and then go to regular class. So then I got to high school, I was out. Okay. Right, I was out. So it was one of those things where come high school, it was like I learned how to kind of sit in the background, how to be quiet, how to watch people, how to decide who to talk to, avoid loud mouths. You know what I mean? So I learned how to really watch people and kind of just navigate. And you know, one of the things I'm gonna tell you is that, you know, a lot of life lessons, a lot of how to deal with people. You know, you learn from your dad, you learn from your mom. Right. You know, you learn from your parents. And I think the thing is, again, you know, I had that focus on my dad. Yeah. My sisters used to say, "Oh, you're daddy's boy." That's what they used to call me. So, you know, it was one of those things where I learned a lot of different tricks and techniques from him. Yeah. You know, and other adults around me as well. Right. You know, just how to handle people. You know, and it was a learning experience. You know, and luckily for me, I did have a few school administrators that were pretty good, that didn't just try to hang me out to dry. You know, I was labeled to a degree, but not labeled, I think, as bad as some other kids where, you know, we work with a lot of kids. Yeah. And that labeling process over the years is something. However, I will say this, my parents' standards were higher than the school standards. Right. They were much higher than the school standards. The school, you know, did not expect that I would go this far. Yeah. They didn't. So. Nice.
Tell us about some of the male mentors that you had in your life growing up outside of your dad.
I had coaches. You play sports. I mean, they're natural mentors. And so I had different coaches. Man Brad Lane, coached me in wrestling in middle school. I wasn't any good, but I stuck with it. I got good in high school. He's a big one. And it's funny because he had family members that lived like in the next street over. So I used to see him every now and then in their neighborhood. But he was a biggie because he was around when I was, you know what I mean, wasn't any good. But even when I went to high school, then he was teaching in the high school, so I used to rap to him. And I remember I got in trouble when he was just telling me how far I'd come and just keep it together. Because I just I got into it with some dude over something.
Right.
And he was like, "Come on, Maury, you've come a long way. Like you ain't getting in trouble like that no more. Don't regress. So just some of the little things. He was one of them. And I had a bunch of different coaches because, like I said, I wrestled, I ran track, and I played football.
Yeah.
Like, all 4 years in high school. And even in middle school, I wrestled. I think I might have ran track 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I played soccer. So my man, Mr. Cheapwood, was one. Mr. Kelly, all these guys, they were definitely mentors that kept me doing something positive. Just instilling that hope in you, but also just teaching those lessons, the lessons of the game that sometimes translate to life. You know what I mean? That sometimes translate to life.
How important do you think that is for like a young man growing up who may not have it? Because it sounds like you had a pretty solid structure at home, but take somebody who doesn't have that structure. How important is it to have these strong mentors and role models in their life?
I think it's absolutely essential. It's absolutely essential. And this isn't my story, but I can tell you a story that a guy told me who I coached with. Man, so I'm not even going to say his name, but he's a good friend of mine, and he said that he was a really good wrestler. He ended up being state champ, and said he was in the house. It was time for it was either conferences or states, and his coach came to his house because he didn't show up for the bus. So he came to his house, and he rings the doorbell, and then he walks into his house, and he goes, "What are you doing, coach?" He goes, "Yo, get your stuff. We're leaving." And he's state champ. But he wouldn't have been state champ if he didn't make it to the meet. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, I mean, it's and I say that because sometimes those things open up other opportunities for you. That sport, when you're good in the sport, that opens up other opportunities for you, as well as he didn't allow him to just throw his talent away. He had talent.
Right.
As something. And those are the things I think that build self-esteem. And that's why sports are important. I've seen coaches who are great coaches, who are great mentors. And in my adult life and working at the Boys and Girls Club and coaching myself and stuff like that, I've seen coaches who sometimes I feel like maybe doing it just justice. Because sometimes as a coach, you can't never be hesitant, regardless of how good somebody is, to try to bring them back down to earth. You can't let people's head float up in the clouds, and sometimes that happens. And and it's dangerous for the youth. You got to be that person that's always like a grounding force.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely can understand that, and it's for young people. Speaking to Amar's point, it's like it's definitely imperative that you have somebody, a strong, solid structure there for you. So a strong positive force there, and sometimes sometimes it may not be, your biological, but it's like, I often tell people in some of the programs I work in, I say to when the kids come in there, we've got a responsibility to really engage them and to be involved in their lives, because for some of the kids, we might be the only positive adult that they see all day. And you have to wear that. You have to be that responsible person.
Absolutely.
And so you are a father.
Yes, sir.
A father. So how's that experience been for you? And how's that experience been being a father and some of the skills or lessons learned from your own father? How's that translated over to your relationship with your child?
Yeah, I think the lessons learned are imperative. And I think one of the things to me about fatherhood is you're passing on this inheritance, but it's not, and I'm not even talking about the physical inheritance, the money, the house, the cars. I'm talking about the skills, the stories, the life lessons. And those are the things that sometimes people don't focus on. But if you really look at like old times when you had before you had all these different automated factories that could just make stuff. Mm-hmm. If you were a locksmith, you taught your kids to be locksmiths. Mm-hmm. If you were a blacksmith and you taught your kids to do that. If you worked in a cleaner, you taught your kids to do that, right? And granted, your kids may not go into the profession you're going to, but there's always certain life lessons to teach them. And I feel like as a dad, whatever those lessons are, whatever you have to teach them, that's part of it. That's part of it. And it starts really when they're young, instilling different things in them, getting to know them, hopefully guiding, their spirituality to where they, are spiritual in life. And that, because that's going to be a journey too, including when they become an adult and they look and they go, oh, well, this is what my mom or my dad taught me. How do I, fit this into my life now? Or do I even want to fit into my life now?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like those lessons, a lot of those lessons, man, I reflect back on. And some things you don't even really fully understand until you get older. And you know, I mean, I know how me being 45 now, I know how older people felt when I was younger, when young people were like, oh, you know, they don't know what they're talking about, blah, blah, blah. And I was never necessarily that guy because I feel like if you're wise, you can learn from other people instead of having to always go through it.
Right.
Some people, they only learn from their own experience. Your own experiences are very limited in comparison. So to me, if I hear somebody tell me that the stove is hot, then I'm gonna take their word for it. I ain't gonna touch it and get burnt.
Yeah.
But I think learning from those experiences from him, even my granddad, learning from certain things, what he had to teach from him.
Right.
You know, there's always lessons to be taught about life. And being an African American, our lessons, you can't learn those lessons in school. I know that much. You can't learn those lessons in school because it's just our lives are much more complicated than just, you know, the average.
Yeah. And I really like the way you phrase that, you know what I mean, about the inheritance. You know, because, you know, I initially, when I hear inheritance, I'm thinking about passing on some type of monetary wealth or some type of material asset. But, you know what I mean, you're talking more about the combined learning, if you will, you know what I mean, the learning and experience and the traditional, you know what I mean, wisdom that's been passed on from generation to generation. Absolutely. And that's an important part of making sure that, you know, that we just carry on our traditions, but have that knowledge, that familial knowledge that goes from generation to generation.
What are some things that you hope to pass on to me?
What are some things I hope to pass on to you? I definitely hope to pass on to you, like from the rich legacy from my grandparents.
Yeah.
You know, so I always talk about it. I know I've spoken with you about it. Like both of them were farmers.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so we come from a farming family. You know, my mother's father, and my father's father were both farmers, and they worked hard. You know what I mean, to get their land. They faced challenges. You know what I mean, they faced institutional racism. Like my mother told me stories of how my grandfather could not borrow from the store during the winter times, you know, when it was lean, right? Mm-hmm. And he couldn't, you know, because farming economy is based on, at least it was back then. I'm not sure how it is now with the big agribusinesses, but it was kind of based on credit. Yeah. So, you know what I mean, and you leveraged, you know what I mean, you leveraged your credit against your potential harvest, your potential yield from your harvest. So he didn't get that. So he had to be self-sufficient. He had to do other things to make way for himself and take care of his family, so that he could provide for them. And then I look at my grandfather. My paternal grandfather was a sharecropper, mm-hmm. and then my dad, your papa, was the oldest son. You know, and it's little funny stuff like that. My dad, he talking about G'ing and hauling, you know, and most people don't even know what that is. G'ing and hauling. It's mule commands. You know what I mean? I think G might be the right and the haul to the left. They're mule commands, you know. And, you know, he tell me about Rhodey and Dinah. Those are the mules. You know what I mean? Different stuff like that. But my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, your great grandfather, you know, he was a sharecropper. He worked. He hustled on the farm because he had plots where he had gardens and stuff like that. And he would, like, my dad said they were like the first ones to have a TV back then. You know what I mean? People from all around would come around, from around the community would come and watch their TV. And they bought the TV selling cucumbers. You know what I mean? But my grandfather, he was an industrious man. He worked hard and saved up, borrowed some money and saved some money to be able to buy the land that when I was born and when I started, you know what I mean, going down and visiting them, the land that they had now and that they still have, you know what I mean, my dad and his siblings and them is parsed out amongst them. But like that's part of it, you know what I mean, being industrious, being driven, being self-sufficient, being a provider for your family, you know, and ownership, you know what I mean? So those are some of the things that I pass on to you. Like when we took our trip and we went, you know what I mean, and purchased some land, you know what I mean? Stuff that when I'm gone, you know what I mean, to pass down to you, pass down to the grandchildren and so on and so forth, because it's important. Yeah. And they understood the importance of that, you know what I mean? So those are some of the lessons that hope to pass down to you, some of that inheritance.
Pass some of that wealth too.
You can get all that.
So So, in your current profession, you deal with kids pretty frequently, right?
Yes.
How important would you say it is to have your dad in your life, like for those children? Like, and do you notice a difference between the children that you deal with who have their dad actively in their life and the ones that don't?
So I'll say this: because I'm more administration now.
Okay.
I mean, I've done a lot of so I can speak from. I'm secondary. I don't know everybody's situation when I come into a classroom, even if I'm there for a while and I do a group or I talk to some of the kids. I don't know all their situations off top like that. But from the jobs that I've had of working with kids, I think it's very important. I think I'm gonna make a distinction between dads that are just there and dads that are actually active in their life. Dads that are active in their life is definitely a difference. And I've only said this to maybe to like one or two other people who I know who have a dad, but I've seen differences between even friends I got who got their dad and friends who don't have their dad,
Me too.
when we're younger. Yeah, it's big. It's a lot. It's certain differences.
Like what? Like what's some of the differences that you see?
So it's differences in kind of in some ways that you present yourself, in some way that certain things you're willing to do. Because one thing, listen, my dad is old school. With certain things he told you, listen, you just don't do that. It's just not appropriate.
Right.
And you can grow up and choose to break it, but that's up to you. But just definitely the way you present yourself, the things you choose, the fights you pick,
Right.
how you deal with other people.
Social skills.
So yeah, absolutely. One thing I'm gonna tell you that I've noticed, and some people get mad. I don't know. Some people get mad when I say this, but women and men have different communication patterns generally, right? We communicate differently. We have different norms of communication at times, and just the way that some guys who I know, and this is just amongst my peer group, who their dads have their dads. Sometimes they communicate differently. They look at things in a slightly different manner as well. It just depends. And again, I'm talking about dads who are involved and active. Because there are some dads that are there, but they're not active. They're not active in their child's life. They're not giving them that inheritance of teaching. They're not dealing with them on a daily basis. But there is a big difference. And I think it's funny. I had a kid one time tell me, and he's not a kid anymore. He's probably 30-something years old. But he said to me, listen, he said, I love my dad, but I know he's a deadbeat. Because his dad wasn't active in his life. And he had come to this realization that, his dad really didn't do right by him. But he still loved his dad. He still went around his dad and talked to his dad. And he may well have gotten some things out of him, but not everything that he probably could have gotten if his dad was more active. Right. If that makes sense.
I definitely agree with that. And I see, to chime in on that, I can, like I mentioned, social skills and just, you see how people handle situations, and really, I see this in myself. Having like my dad was always there. We had some, I had some things that I wish we would have done more of, and but he was there. He was there. He was a presence, and like I shared, I understand why my father is the way he is, being stoic and not expressing a lot of emotions and things of that nature, and from his upbringing. I get that. But I look back now, and for me, I see, like, I picked up a lot of his mannerisms. Sometimes, the stuff I say out my mouth and how I talk and stuff. I'm serious, man. I be like, shit, where I picked that country, I like, where did that come from? But I pick it up from my dad, and I don't know, you just pick that stuff up and I carry it. And I used to be ashamed of it. In my younger years, I said, I'm gonna try to stay as far away from being who he was, and and who he is, because I want to blaze my own trail, right? And which I feel as though I have. But now I'm proud of having similarities and things with my dad, the stuff that carries on, he rubbed off on me. So I'm just telling you, just get ready. Because you're going to be saying some crazy stuff too.
Turn into your dad, like the Geico commercial.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
So, what, it's funny, because I just thought of an even better example, just a simple example, that, and this is from the influence of my dad. My dad was not, how old heads back in our day, when we was young, right? They would, their dress game was just like a little different. They might wear some some sweatpants and some
Shoes.
some shoes.
Some loafers.
Listen, my dad was not no fancy dress. I mean, he put the suit on to go to church.
Yeah.
But one thing I could never relate to. I mean, I like what I like. I'm in fashion. I look at something, I like it. Okay, I'm good. I'm gonna wear it. I'm simple like that, right? And it's funny though because I can remember people. They got a white sneak. They get one scar. They ready to trash them. And that was not. I never understood that. And I could tell the difference between because you know what? I could clean it up. I could figure out where to clean it up. I might have to wear it with the scar on it. You know what I mean, or whatever. But that was never that huge of a deal to me.
Right.
But you know, there were always these dudes who were like, "Oh man, my boot. I got my Timbs is messed up." You know, it had to be perfectly ironed, perfectly. Listen, I'm gonna tell you one of my boys, man. This guy, we go on trips in college. This guy be ironing for like an hour, literally. I'm telling you. And
we all
that
got
was
one
the
of
joke.
them.
Yeah, he be ironing for like an hour long, man. We'd be like, "What are you doing? Like, you done yet?" Because he got to get it all perfect. And my dad just, you know, the influence of my particular dad was like, you know, that's not really a big deal.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Not you want to look nice. You know what I mean? You want to iron. Your shoe got a little scratch on it, you're gonna be all right.
Yeah.
What were some things that were a big deal to him that he kind of imposed on you?
Spirituality. And my people's a Christian, so my dad's a pastor. And it's funny because you guys got into that whole the family conversation, right? About like in the family tree. Whenever my sister's been doing our family, and when you go back, we see it was several ministers in there. You know what I mean? You start to see different things that people did, and then how it affects you, and you see those similarities.
Wow.
You know what I mean? You start to see those similarities, like even in profession and what they did and all that. But I'm gonna tell you, so just trusting in God and also living that way.
Right.
You know what I mean? Believing that everything's gonna be all right. He knew how to instill hope in everything you did, and that's one of the things when you look at developmentally and they talk about what the female brings and what the mom brings, what the dad brings, and those things are slightly different.
Right.
Dads generally bring a lot of security, and they bring in that more traditionally bring that discipline. That's not always the case. Sometimes the moms, you know, the harder the two, but traditionally, most of the time they bring that discipline, and they balance each other out. The moms usually bring more. They definitely bring more comfort and things of that nature. And what I'll say is, and I'm gonna tell you, I've seen this from my experience of working at the Boys and Girls Club, where we had some parents where the dad wasn't around, the mom was there. I remember the kid falling down. Oh my gosh, runs out on the floor and picks her son up.
Yeah.
And listen, I'm hitting there smacking my head like, what is going on? Like,
Right.
your son is going to be soft as I don't know what. And for me, it's not something where I go over the top with it. Like, oh, you're so no, but it is. You gotta let kids fall down and get up.
Right.
You gotta let kids fail. You gotta, you know, at times, and then teach them the lesson from that. You gotta let kids feel pain. You know, I tell my daughter, and hey, listen, should that get hurts? Pain's a part of life. You're gonna get a needle. People pretend that pain is not a part of life, but it is. You know, so one of the things I try to teach her when I had to hold her down for her flu shot because she was fighting me, is pain is a part of life.
Right.
You gotta get used to this because you're gonna get a lot of needles in your life at some point. You know, you're gonna be back to the doctor next year for another flu shot.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
and if she does gymnastics, my daughter been doing gymnastics since 3, and I got them little girls are tough. But one of the things I try to teach her is, listen, if you're doing a sport, you're gonna have some achy knees, some hurt ankles. Let's not cry about it. Let's just get used to dealing with it. Let's put some ice on it.
Right.
You know, let's wrap it up. Whatever we need to do.
Teaching her to build up her own resilience.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? I definitely agree with that. You know, it's like, because I know people think about, oh, you got to make them tough and all that. No, you got to create an environment where a child can learn how to be resilient. You know, and particularly we look at the communities now, like groups I run with young people, and you know, I always teach them like you can't necessarily or immediately impact your environment in most cases, but what you can do is you can build up your own mental and emotional fortitude. Build up a team of people, caring people around you, and know who they are and know where these safe places are so that you can be strong in your own space. And oftentimes that, you know, I mean, and the research bears this out as well, is that if you have these things, these supports and what they call it developmental assets and whatnot, different names for them, if you have this stuff, like you can often really overcome your environment if you have these positive things. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
What do you think the consequences are if we don't help our children and like our communities build resiliency early on in life? Like, what does that start to look like as they get older?
Starts to look like they become vulnerable. I mean, physically and emotionally vulnerable. You know, we talk about nowadays. Trauma. We understand. We got the knowledge on the scope of knowledge on trauma is really getting broader, and everybody's in everybody's conversation. But when you have people who are experiencing trauma and toxic trauma, over time, I mean, it definitely impacts you. It impacts you emotionally, psychologically, and physiologically, right? It physically changes your brain. It physically, being exposed to toxic trauma over time, it literally changes how your brain is wired, and it also is on in your DNA as well.
Yeah.
There's some research. I was my guy. What's the sister's name? DeGrew. Dr. DeGrew, and she gave a talk, and I was out in Colorado, and she gave a talk talking about post-traumatic slave. I think it was post-traumatic slave. Don't quote me on the post-traumatic slave syndrome or post-traumatic slave disorder, whatever it is. Don't quote me on it. But she said she mentioned some research where they had exposed mice, so they gave them a whiff of peppermint. And with with the peppermint, the reinforcement line was a negative reinforcement behind it. So maybe it was a shock or something like that. And so you make the association between it, just like Pavlov with the dogs. You make a association between the smell of peppermint and pain. And she said that over the next generation of mice that were born, they didn't even have to have the actual pain, just the smell of the peppermint. You made them have the same response as their parent did. So we're talking about pain and trauma being carried on in the DNA chain from generation to generation, and that's what we're dealing with. So when you look at young people being exposed to all this stuff that's going on in these communities, and I'll be remiss if I didn't speak and say it plainly, it's definitely based on structural violence. The issues that we have in our community aren't by happenstance. They aren't by accident. It's by design. It's social design, and the impact of it is our communities are imploding on themselves.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think and I think a lot of it is self maintenance now. People fall into the role. It's like the peppermint thing. They knew not to mess with the peppermint, but it's like, after when you don't have anything at home, when you don't have not only a dad, but an active dad, an active mom, active structure at home, then you start looking for the meaning of life on your own.
Yeah.
And you're going to go outside, and if you live in that type of neighborhood, you're going to find some things that, are going to send you down probably a negative path, unless you go out there and you find something positive. And, and it just depends on who you are, what resources are around you, and what you happen to grab onto.
Yeah. Let me ask you this: being a social scientist, what type of skills do you think that every father should have in their toolkit? Because and I say this because sometimes, we mentioned about fathers that are there but not like really emotionally available, and sometimes it's people do it because they they may, the level of care that they have for the child may not be there, but some people just don't know. So what type of tools do you think that every father should have in their parenting and social emotional toolkit?
Yeah, I think number one, active listening. Listening to your kids, showing that interest, spending time. And teach them as much as you can. I mean, you don't have to have a doctor to teach them the lessons that you already learned.
Right.
Whatever that looks like for you, bring what you have to the table. It's like the people that work for us, we put them in a structure, and we say, and also bring your skills, whatever that you have with you.
Right.
I think that they also, you got to have balance. You got to be a balance. You got to have a balanced hand. It's easy to be over the top when somebody is not doing what you want them to do. It's easy to be 100% negative. But if you're going to come down on somebody, then you have to make sure that you have that relationship already built with your kid, and you have to make sure that you also give them that positive reinforcement, give them that compliment when they do something well. Right. That's what's going to keep them going. It's like the positive reinforcement might just be you saying, "Yo, I'm proud of you.
Yeah.
You know, I'm glad you did that." And with kids, sometimes they don't listen, right? Sometimes sometimes they appear not to be listening, but they listen more than you think. They always do,
Right.
you know. They always do. It's funny because me and my daughter have a funny relationship, and I tell her I'm proud of her, and she kind of shrugs her shoulders like, "Yeah, whatever," but she loves it, and I know she does because she always comes over to me at some point and gives me a hug or leans on my shoulder or something like that. But she tries to pretend like she doesn't like it, like whatever. Like, and it might be awkward for her
Right.
for me to say, "Hey, I'm proud of you, I love you." You know, it might be a little awkward for her, but she gets it. She gets it, and I keep doing it every chance I get. You know, so
Beautiful thing.
How many kids do you have?
one.
Just one. What's it like? What are some of the challenges you face raising your daughter?
You know, I mean, the big challenges for me are, honestly, are really embedded in, and the challenges for me are embedded in, you know, my daughter's expectations, divorce, and being on the same page with the person who, you know what I mean, her mom and stuff like that. Those would be the biggest challenges. I mean, it's about her expectations, what she thinks of me, what she expects, and then me having to lay those expectations. But, you know, it's one of those things where a divorce, what people don't realize about divorce is it's one of those things that's very traumatic for the child.
Right.
Very traumatic for the child, whether they say it or they don't say it or whatever. When they used to live with two parents and they're living with one parent, and going back and forth. Now, you know, they feel some type of way. So I think for her it took a little bit, a year and a half, 2 years, and then she started to mature more. And you know, as long as she sees consistency and that you're still gonna be there, I think that's the biggest. I think that's a big time barrier for kids. You know, consistency. One thing that I knew was that I was not leaving my daughter. You know, and she knows that. I think initially she might have thought that I was, but she knows because I got her 50% of the time and I'm always there.
Yeah.
So she knows it. So, you know, and I always make sure that I give her a lot of positive reinforcement as well as let her know when she's being, you know, doing something that's wrong.
Yeah. And I, you know, one of the things that that you said to me, or that you shared with me when we talked throughout the days or whatever, is I like how you allow for your daughter like to figure some things out emotionally. You know what I mean? You kind of like create a space. All right, listen, this is what's going on. All right, well, I'm gonna give you some time. You know what I mean? I hear him, I'm like, damn, he sounds like, you know what I mean? He just laid back. All right, I'm gonna give you some time. You go in there and just chill and figure it out. And you know what I mean? Come back out in a couple minutes and we're gonna talk about it and all that. And I think that's dope, man. That's real dope parenting, man. And people don't hear that side, you know what I mean, oftentimes, particularly with black men, you know what I mean, parenting their children. That's pretty amazing, man. That's pretty amazing. So
I think it's natural for some people to want to be a type A. You do what I tell you to do but anger's anger, frustration's frustration. As long as you work it out appropriately, I'm fine with it because that teaches them to work it out appropriately.
Right.
You know, if she wasn't working out appropriately, then we have an issue. Like at one point, she would slam her door, and we had a conversation. I said, "Listen," I said, "you can be angry, you can go in your room, you can get mad, all that, but this door, you're gonna break it. So the next time you slam it, I'm taking it off the hinges and I'm putting it in my room and where am I change? You can change in the bathroom." Just like, you know, and she stopped slamming the door. So now she just, you know, and the thing with my daughter, she has a lot of good coping skills. So, you know, she knows what to do when she's frustrated and angry. So that's what she does.
Nice. You got anything else for Dr. McDuffy?
Yeah, one more thing. How do you teach the kids that when you were dealing more like hands on with the kids, how do you teach them to build resiliency?
Yeah, I think a lot of resiliency is built through experience and then helping kids process the experiences that they have. Okay. And this is one thing that my dad was really great at, and he put it in a religious paradigm a lot of times. You know, you come home. The one thing I knew about growing up was if I go home and I had been made fun of, I had been in a fight, I'm feeling down and depressed, that I went home and my dad always put everything in perspective. You know, and the perspective for him is, listen, don't worry about them. God's going to take care of you. He puts his special people to the side. And he just knew what to say. And I think the best way to teach resilience is sometimes you got to let them go through the situations. And then when they go through the situations, if they fall down, you know what I mean? Then they learn a lesson from that. You teach them how to get back up and keep going.
Right.
When they come in and they see, I think when some things are too smooth sometimes, you don't learn that resilience as much.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you, it's funny because in my career, right, I look at my life and where the places I was at, including the IP program, right? And I'm not the only one. I know some other boys who was in there too, and they got master's and master's degrees. So I don't even take it that seriously when I look at school. But it's funny, when you go through those things and you deal with certain people, dealing with the kids is easy.
Yeah,
it really is. I mean, because you learn resilience from dealing with people when you didn't have any control. Now you come in as an adult, you got a little bit of control, right?
Yeah.
I don't have to control every single behavior they do. I just have to get you from point A to point B, and it may not look the same for each kid.
Right.
So I think what you got to do is just let them experience certain things, but frame it for them and help them to process it, you know? And you still have to set that structure. You know, when I say experience certain things, I'm talking about like sometimes they might fail a class, and then you got to frame it for them. You got to talk to them, process them, give them a consequence, and keep it moving. I mean, I wasn't good at wrestling 6th to 8th grade, man. I was not good. I might have got a little bit better, and they rated me out badly. My coach sent the other coach. I found out my senior year at the when I was at the banquet. He said, "Yeah, we got a rating system. George Reed here," and this guy was not rated well. You know, but I kept with it, and that you know that kind of taught me how to be resilient as well.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? I had a pretty good high school career, and the thing is, it's just you gotta put kids in situations. Sometimes you might have to say, "Nah, you can't quit. You at least got to finish the season," you know, or you just got to finish this, making them finish.
Yeah.
Putting them in situations where they don't want to be, but sometimes you got to know when to set that boundary. Sometimes setting that boundary allows them also to grow and learn too. You know, my daughter, like, she can't go anywhere without a phone, and you know, she's sitting in the back of the car. She don't got internet. Guess what? I drove around with internet all the time when I was young. She whined from here to Milford. One time we were going to Georgetown for a gymnastics meet, and I said, "Well, listen, you just ain't got it. You ain't charge it. You ain't got it. You gonna be all right." We was all right too. You want to draw? You got your drawing stuff in there? Draw.
Yeah.
So she started drawing.
Nice.
You know what I mean?
Nice. Hey man, we want to thank you, Dr. McDuffy, man, for coming in here and just sharing everything, all your tidbits of wisdom, man. You got a certain way of putting things, and I really, really appreciate it. And I'm gonna steal that inheritance piece, just so you know. Oh, yeah. I'm gonna carry it. I'm gonna make sure that I continue to share that. You know?
I stole it from my dad. I mean, I had to cite him, APA style site.
Yeah.
So my dad's the one that taught me that, for real.
Yeah, man. So again, man, we want to thank you, man, for coming and spending the evening with us and sharing on our podcast. And I'm Coley Harris.
And I'm Amar Melton.
Thank you for listening to Missing Dad.